What's up, everybody? It's Kevin and Sergey once again welcoming you back to the channel for another episode in our Antares lore series.
This episode, we're talking about the disparate factions of the Freeborn, the mercantile race of Antares space.
The houses of the Freeborn were able to emerge as one of the great powers of the 7th Age, pretty much right in the same time period as the historic rift between the Pan-Human Concord and the Isaurian Imtel societies.
The Freeborn are made up of massive mercantile fleets that are primarily responsible for shuttling technology, people, goods, and services across Antares space. And, most famously, they're actually able to trade with the great Imtel factions of the Isaurian Cenitex and the Pan-Human Concord in a safe way, unlike most other factions. These fleets also make up the homes of the Freeborn. The Freeborn are predominantly a spacefaring race, meaning they don't really spend any time on planets. You can be born as a Freeborn, live as a Freeborn, and die as a Freeborn without ever setting foot planetside.
The Freeborn use these massive fleets to hold on to territory in their trade empires, guarding different gates and planets that they find incredibly resourceful. But it is important to note that even though there are a innumerable amount of these fleets, the Freeborn as a faction is not unified. They're actually quite subdivided into much smaller trade empires, basically.
Each of these fleets form a distinct and rival community known as a Vardos, or Freeborn House. The people who form a Vardos call themselves the Vardosi or the Vardon, which translates roughly to house or housefolk.
But all crazy terminology aside, most people just refer to them as the Freeborn.
A Vardos's wealth is made up of its connections and its trade routes, which are jealously guarded and often lead to violent conflict between different rival Vardoses?
Vardosi?
I'm not sure.
These conflicts that erupt over trade routes can see some Vardos literally disappear as they are destroyed or absorbed into different Freeborn houses, and this is how the Freeborn kind of expand their little trade empires. From the highest positions in leadership to the lowliest positions in Freeborn society, all are governed by their strict kind of familia-like relationships. They have many obligations and strict rules and a sense of honor, which actually knits them all together, which I actually overlooked the first time I read the fiction. And so when I'm always like giving my Damari a hard time, but then, you know, being surprised when they survive like onslaughts and like huge amounts of enemy fire, they do have a strict code of honor that actually keeps them moving in a forward momentum, which is really cool.
Exactly, and it's pretty unique as far as the mercantile race goes. In most like sci-fi settings, the mercantile race is like the grubby kind of like I'm gonna shoot you with my blaster if you don't give me 6 credits kind of.
That's very true. Yeah, they're very like seedy in their nature. Yeah. As far as the organizational structure, like we said, the Vard, or I'm sorry, the Varda, or the house, is further subdivided by basically a bunch of different families or clans that are known as domas, and each of these domas is led by kind of like a clan leader, and they're referred to as a doma. Just like, there's a lot of terms in the Freeborn.
And this clan structure is really cool, especially from like just a like creative inspiration level. Like when you're painting your Freeborn, you can have like a couple soldiers from one clan and a couple soldiers from another clan. Maybe they wear different colored pants, who knows?
Ooh, that's true. Yeah, you could have like different heraldries or whatever.
Yeah,
because it is like with the fleet, I always think of like Battlestar Galactica, because it's like, you know, there could be a clan that is head of like the smelting operation ship, or a clan that's like head of like the mercenary division, and so you get the like
textile
kind of like
clan wears a lot of blue jeans.
Yes, the textile clan. They got the Wrangler division.
Now, it's important to note that not all clans are necessarily created equally. This is not something like the Concord or the Isaurian where they're post-scarcity, and the wealthier, more influential families make up something like an aristocracy that leads the Freeborn underneath the head of the house, which would be known as the Vard. Foreign entities often refer to the Freeborn Vard as the Lord of a Vardos, and this comparison really holds a lot of water because the structure of Freeborn society definitely holds a lot of similarities with that medieval concept. However, this is not necessarily how Freeborn society is supposed to work. The clans are supposed to have something of a democratic power in order to elect a Vard that will then look after the interest of the Vardos as a whole. In reality, this is not really the case. The Vard tends to take a nepotistic route, electing a blood relative to take up the quote-unquote throne.
This power struggle and the fact that the Vard oftentimes just picks someone to take over for him results in basically like clan violence sometimes, where one clan will feel slighted and so use their power and influence to like hire assassins or stage coups or, you know, I don't know, just do anything they can do to gain power of the house. And sometimes this doesn't work, and sometimes it even results in civil wars that can actually destroy a whole Freeborn house from within. Looking away from the highest echelons of Freeborn society and kind of taking a more detailed look at the clan structure, each Doma is basically a family of Freeborn that provides the crews for ships, the garrison forces for planets, and the backbone of what makes up the Freeborn military. Because the Freeborn exhibit a very human-centric society, it is very possible for a member of a Doma to start off as kind of like a lowly crew hand or like deck person from a ship and actually elevate themselves to the position of like a Freeborn captain or someone of more influence that gets to possess wealth and influence, which is very different from a lot of the Intel societies that are present in Antares space. This fact leads to many Freeborn kind of performing substantially more rash decisions than, you know, what would be normal for an Intel society. If they see resources that can be plundered or, you know, like things that they can get their hands on that would normally be incredibly dangerous of a prospect, they're going to do it because it can help them in their standing in their society. And this kind of human aspect, you know, translates to the Freeborn as a whole, which really makes the Intel societies of the entire universe look at them as kind of like rash and dangerous and crazy because like family obligations, sense of like, you know, situations that involve honor are going to motivate the Freeborn to make decisions that wouldn't be normal.
Now, as far as the makeup of Freeborn society, it's mostly pan-human, but there are several different pan-human morphs in there, and even some aliens. This is due to an interesting tradition in Freeborn society that says if you're born in the territory of a Vardos, then you just become a member of that Vardos regardless of your parentage. Once again, from a creativity sparking aspect, this is a really cool place where you can put a little bit of conversion work into your squads. Like for example, Kevin has a couple Boramites in his Freeborn Vardanari squads.
Hank's Hunks.
Hank's Hunks, yeah, I forgot about Hank's Hunks. They could be part of the Blue
it's okay
Jeans,
to forget about them.
The Wrangler squad. You can give them all jeans.
I'll paint them to have blue jeans.
Yep.
Oh, Christ.
The Boramites definitely wear blue jean cutoffs for sure.
Another interesting aspect of the makeup of Freeborn society is that there are actually renegade Nuhu that exist within the ranks of the Freeborn. And this is kind of weird. I'm sure it's like in some supplement that we haven't quite found yet, but apparently a whole world in the Concord basically defected, I assume. And the Nuhu kind of like looked to have what would you call it, like sanctuary within the Freeborn, and it was apparently something that not every member of the Freeborn agreed with, but they still were able to integrate into some of the Vardos. And these Nuhu are kind of like a little bit darker, and they kind of refer to them as not really looking at normal pan-humans in the nicest light. And they're also absolutely willing to perform some of the more kind of like looked down upon experimentations amongst the Freeborn, which is really weird.
Like, it's pretty darkly immoral experimentation.
Yeah, like we're definitely starting to tiptoe into like actual evil like territory with these renegade Nuhu, but we'll kind of touch on that here in a minute.
Like Kevin said, the Freeborn are as technologically advanced as any of the Imtel races, and this has a lot to do with the fact that they are the intermediaries in all of the trades that happen in Antares space. This means they see all of the technology of the Concord and the Freeborn and can replicate it.
Another important note in this regard, though, is that Freeborn forces are often the first in exploratory missions that unearth kind of like alien technologies that they're willing to utilize. They also will sift over ancient battlefields to recover technologies and weapons that they will absolutely use. And they're not above blatant piracy. If they see something that they can kind of steal, they will if they have the opportunity to. That's just kind of the nature of their mentality.
While the Freeborn have access to all of this awesome technology, they don't use the same amount of AI integration that the Concord and the Isaurians do. However, they do still use nanite technology. Because they still use this nanite technology, the Freeborn have to protect themselves from the Imtel races lest they be corrupted and brought into the fold, so to speak. To do this, they have many different layers of nanospore that are all incompatible with each other, so if one gets corrupted, it can be shed and replaced easily. Now, this does not mean that the Freeborn are completely immune to Imtel influence. Eventually, the Imtel will get to them if given enough time, but this affords them a certain level of protection.
Their most famous utilization of this kind of style of nanite technology is to employ the use of like many barriers of what they call like nanite scrubbers. Basically, when a Concord or Imtel society sends them something like a technology or like a physical resource that they're going to be using and trading, the transmat beam is brought through these scrubber barriers, completely stripping these objects of their Imtel nanites. And then once the Freeborn has access to these like physical objects, they reshard them with a new kind of like neutral nanospore that can then be traded to any other society, the Algorand, someone in the Determinate, without worrying that their society is going to be corrupted by the Concord. This, however, leads me to believe that there has to be instances in Antaran history where the Concord's like, will you please give these toasters to this planet and like maybe not scrub them entirely? And the Concord are like, well, I mean, for the right price, this could maybe be determined. We could maybe do this. It's so evil, but I'm sure it's happened.
Just because the Freeborn are a mercantile race does not mean that they aren't ready for combat when they need to be. Their military is a little bit unorthodox in the fact that literally any of their mercantile fleets could be used for war if pressed to.
Whenever a Vard is in need of basically like military units or troops or vessels, they basically look to the house and as a whole, and they will levy troops from each clan, and these troops are known as Domari. These household troops are armed and armored by their own clan, which means that they could be very different in appearance or, composition. But generally speaking, the Freeborn do tend to utilize the more kind of reliable technology of the entire universe. So you're going to see them armed with mag-based weapons, as well as reflex armor, and just a little bit of glitz and other more unique items.
While most of the Freeborn military is made up of Domari, there are also the Vardanari, which are the honor guard of the more powerful and influential families in Freeborn society. These Vardanari are essentially a display of ostentatious wealth and power by influential families within Freeborn society. They're decked out in all of the best equipment that money can buy, and they are highly trained soldiers that are essentially meant to guard wealthy families. Something that is necessary because of all of the aforementioned assassination attempts and intrigues of court that tends to follow around these wealthy families.
These mercenaries for hire are in such high demand that it is actually also not uncommon for Vards to kind of levy the soldiers from the more, unsophisticated worlds in Antaran space. And these are often referred to as feral soldiers that are kind of equipped in... depending on who's equipping them, they could have access to like things like reflex armor and whatnot, but more often than not, they're usually equipped in the most cheap manner possible so that they can, maximize profits. And in some more edge cases, these troops are even sometimes like cybernetically augmented with somographs to make them a little bit more controllable, I guess is what you would say.
Controllable, mind controlled, yep.
Yeah. And I guess that's something that's supposed to be like not looked on very highly, but since it exists in the rules, I'm sure that most people use it. Now that concludes the kind of like general information of the general Freeborn, but there's such a large faction in Antares space that kind of have, you know, like we said, a subdivision of like a bunch of different houses, that we are going to continue by explaining one of the more influential houses in the actual kind of fluff and storyline that directly pertains to the story of Antares. And this house is House Ozon.
House Ozon is not the most powerful or largest freeborn house in entire space, but it does control a very wide swath of territory. Over the past several hundred years, House Ozon has managed to grow by absorbing several smaller Vardoses to form what's called the Ozani Mercantile League. One would expect this to be something of an alliance between these different houses, but that's not really the case. They've essentially become vassals of House Ozon and are subjugated beneath it.
The leader of the Ozani Mercantile League and House Ozon itself is the Vard Barrow Haran. Vard Haran has led this house for more than 100 years now, keeping in mind that he's still technically young because people live a lot longer in the entire universe. I guess you could technically just keep living using clones and whatnot. His leadership has seen them through several wars with these other houses, and most importantly, he has been able to wrest control of all of the trade routes leading in to the Algorand Prosperate.
This positioning has allowed House Ozon to ally itself with the Algorand Prosperate and create kind of a stable region of Antaran space. Their alliance goes so far as to even allow House Ozon to help the Algorand in their ancestral battle against the Gar.
Outside of the Ozani Mercantile League's holdings within the Algorand Prosperate, the most valuable world they control is a feral world that is less known by the outside world, known as Magris. From the outside looking in, you would not assume that this is one of the more valuable planets, because Magris is basically home to scalding hot deserts, ruins from the Trisapien Age that dot the surface of the world, you know, basically sparse cactus-like vegetation, and a huge civilization of pan-humans that are kind of like the most barbaric and brutal of, you know, Antaran space.
Humans are not the only population on this planet. It also houses the vicious skarks, which are essentially flying maw monsters, and gripworms, which can draw you beneath the sand.
An additional aspect that makes this planet so valuable is the fact that it exists so low in the photosphere of the Antaran Nexus. There's basically like a critical level in which ships cannot pass deeper into, or else they basically like can't come out without being destroyed, and that's where this planet lies. And so it basically gives House Ozon an amazing base of operations that's a lot harder to detect and find by the other like kind of more advanced civilizations that they deal with.
This makes it the closest thing that House Ozon has to a planet-side colony, and it's extremely useful because they use it as a training ground for feral troops that they draw from the quote-unquote savage population of the planet.
They must possess desert power. This levying of feral troops was actually not a difficult task for the Ozani to achieve, because the feral population of the world had always regarded the ancient cities from the Trisapien ages as cities of like the giants and the gods. And so when House Ozani discovered the planet, a lot of them regarded it as like the return of said gods. And as a result, it has been considered for, you know, many generations to be quite an honorable thing for their peoples and tribes peoples to be selected to be levied into the Ozani military and serve as these military warriors. The only thing that I assume that they did not enjoy is the kind of secret things that went on in the background, because, as we said before, there are renegade Nuhu within the Freeborn, and House Ozani was one of the houses that accepted a lot of these renegades. And the thing that they do in the shadows is allow these renegade Nuhu to experiment on these feral soldiers. They oftentimes cybernetically enhance them to have what are known as somographs, so that they're a little bit more controllable and reliable on the battlefield, as well as absolutely. And they also allow these renegade Nuhu to use the feral stock of the planet in their weird like pan-human and transgenic experimentations, which are as a whole really looked down on as in the entire universe.
That would be a hard sell to your stockholders.
Yeah. And this concludes all of the information presented for the Freeborn faction within the main rulebook. Like I said previously at the beginning of the episode, this is one of my favorite factions, and it doesn't really have to do with the composition of the Freeborn or like their visuals. It's mostly their lore. Their lore is one of the most kind of like ones that are the best for you to come in and create your own factions, which is really cool.
Yeah, well, and they're also like, they're a very complex faction. There's a lot. They have the most like human element, so their evils are very human, like the Nuhu dark experimentation on humans, and also their virtues are very human, like their honor and their pride in their families, which makes them both really cool and morally complex in an interesting way.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said earlier, that is one of those things that I kind of forgot when I was reading it, that makes a lot, or not makes a lot of sense, just makes them way cooler, is that the fact that they are so obsessed with, like, you know, family obligations and honor, you know, like it says with the Ozani, they literally like had that, you know, rivalry that lasted for years just because someone refused to marry another person in like an arranged marriage situation. It's really neat, and it's one of those things that when I think about how they play in the battlefield, we've talked a lot about how my Damari have survived many different situations where you would assume that militia-style troops would not survive, and so that overlay of their kind of like honor-bound system makes it way cooler.
Exactly.
Well, as always, it was incredibly fun discussing Antares lore. We appreciate you guys watching the episode, and if you liked it, you should absolutely like the video. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, you should absolutely do so. We would love to have you.
If you want to support us even further and look fresh to death doing it, you can purchase some TTW swag at the spring link right beneath this video. If you want to support the channel in the best way pan-humanly possible, we do have a Patreon campaign where you'll gain access to our Patreon-exclusive development vlogs.
Thanks for watching, and keep your eye out for more lore videos coming down the pike, and we will see you on the tabletop.